What's up, Land Rover fans? Today I'm going to show you how to replace the coolant pipes, both the front and rear, on a 2012 Land Rover LR4. Now this is a really common problem on the 5-liter V8. It's in the LR4s of this vintage, as well as the later LR4s that have the 3-liter supercharged V6. It's essentially the same engine minus 2 cylinders. The engine has these plastic coolant pipes that connect the different banks, and they are a two-piece design. So there's a seam. Sometimes that seam will split and start to leak. Other times the O-rings themselves will get flattened out and you'll get a coolant leak. But this is a really common problem on these Land Rovers. Because this vehicle has some miles on it, this one has 176,000 miles, I'm gonna go ahead and replace the water pump while I'm in there, and I'm gonna replace the front and the rear coolant pipes. I don't know which one has failed, but they're both old, so I'm gonna replace both of them. I got these parts from Atlantic British. In total, I want to say they're less than $100 a piece. The water pump was maybe 140 or something like that. So not terribly expensive, and it's certainly worth the peace of mind. This was a slow leak, but these are known to fail catastrophically where the engine loses all of its coolant, like if you're on the highway or something, and that can send this engine to the graveyard. So it's a big deal to keep these in good shape and make sure that you take care of the leaks promptly. Let's go ahead and get started. For this job, we're gonna have to pull off the plastic cover. Once we get down in there, we're gonna have to pull off the intake manifold. With the engine cover out of the way, you gotta get all this stuff off. Just a couple hose clamps, really. And this will free up a little bit of space for us. Now, when you pull this off, there's an intake hose kind of on this right side here that you'll have to disconnect in order to pull the whole plenum off out of the way. So there we go, out of the way. And now she just pulls off and get them totally out of the way. Now with that intake plenum off, I want to show you how I actually diagnosed this. You can see, do you see that orange? See the orange down there? So that is coolant. It's bright orange. Now it's a lot easier to see in person. It's kind of hard to capture on the phone, but yeah, that is the orange Dexcool coolant sitting in the valley of the engine. Next up, what I'm gonna do is pull this fan off. This is a backwards thread, so you're gonna wanna turn this clockwise to loosen it. You lock it up with this one, turn it with that one, and the fan will come off. There's a connector over here as well. I'll actually disconnect this before. Now the fan is ready to pull out. Just be careful here. I go kind of slow at the very end. I don't want to smash this thing into the radiator. With the fan out of the way, because I'm replacing the water pump, I'm going to go ahead and deal with this belt tensioner right here. I'm going to get my breaker bar on that and then just pull the belt off of the water pump. Now, I'm going to disconnect this hose from our coolant pipe and get as much of that coolant into the bucket as I can. I've got some funnels and things to try to keep this clean. Next up, I'm gonna pull off this coolant hose right here and catch the coolant in the same kind of way, and I'll pick it up. So you can see the coolant in there. Fortunately, when you take this one off first, you can catch the coolant easily, and then this is lower than up here, so you're not gonna spill anything. But you see how I just rotated this around? In order to actually pull this intake manifold off, we are gonna have to remove this steel fuel line. Fortunately, that's not really that hard to do. We just need to crack this right here. And now I've got to do the same thing on this side, 17 millimeter. Fuel line is now out of the way, and now we're pretty much ready to take the intake manifold off. There are some air lines that need to be removed. They're all just kind of clip-in type things. And then we've got these bolts right here that go down the intake manifold. We've got to get those off, and this will lift straight up. I've got my feet where the airbox would normally sit, and this gives me pretty easy access to get back here and get to these T30 Torx bolts that hold the wiring loom in its plastic protective shell that goes across the back of the engine here. So right now, I'm getting the actual bolts off the intake manifold. These are 10 millimeter bolts. They're not super tight. First one of 10. Last one is out. there's a coolant line underneath here, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's this Y connection here. So I've disconnected the top part, but I need to disconnect the part that connects to the water pump. This actually goes to the throttle body here. Now to disconnect this, what I need to do is actually push in this kind of middle ring that you see, and then pull out on this. So it's kind of hard to do while I'm holding the camera, but essentially I'm gonna get these needle nose on here, put them on here and push that part back while pulling with my hand the other part. So now when you pull this off, you will lose some coolant out of there, so just be prepared to catch some. I did the same thing, I had the bucket down here. So everything is free now. What I want to point out is the things I had to disconnect. So if you look right here, this guy is just a clip, but it's clipped into the back. Kind of hard to see, but there's a hole in the back of the intake manifold there. And then this electrical connector right here, this is connected right there, that gray connector in the center of the screen there. So you need to get that off, and then the coolant hose, it actually runs to the coolant plastic pipe that we're going to be replacing. That is just kind of tucked into plastic recesses underneath the intake manifold. A little tip, just before you are fiddling around with everything, lifting this out, trying to get to the connectors and all that, reach under and stuff something into the holes for the heads there. We do not want anything falling into the engine. Here's what it looks like with it pulled off. Be forewarned, you will lose a lot of coolant. So when you pull that out, a lot of the coolant's gonna come out of the engine. I've got a catch pan underneath. I've got a bunch of cardboard underneath as well. I just let most of it drip and try to catch as much as I can. I shot vac up on top to pull up as much of this as I could. I'm gonna go in right now with some microfibers and just clean all this up. As you can see, I was unable to pull it off successfully without breaking that brittle plastic. The plastic with the O-ring section is still actually stuck in there, so it's a little hard to see here, but get the flashlight. The lower bolt, which is right there, that's being blocked by the belt tensioner. So we got to get that off. That's a 15mm bolt. Just get that bolt off, the tensioner will come right off, and you'll get access to the last of the T30 Torx bolts that hold the water pump on. Just got the water pump off. Got this just kind of cleaned up the area a little bit. Now, one thing I'm going to have to do still, if you look closely, there's actually little bits of the gasket stuck to that mating surface there. I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to get some brake cleaner and just kind of clean that surface up. I got new gaskets. They came with a new water pump. And then I just pulled out these as well. You can see the condition of that plastic. I mean, it's very brittle. The O-rings were still kind of stuck to this plastic, but I just used this plastic pry tool right here and just got down in there and popped them out. They actually came out really easily. So I've got the new water pump prepped, ready to install. A couple quick tips here to get the gaskets lined up. Now they're only going to fit on there one way based on the hole pattern there. What I like to do is just get the bolts threaded like a single thread, and it'll catch that gasket, and that'll hold everything in place for you to put the water pump back in. So I've already put the new O-ring seal on this coolant pipe, and then the new plastic piece with another O-ring seal onto the new water pump. So just gonna carefully slide this thing in place. Get everything lined up here. And just give it a tight push. There we go. And now I'm ready to thread these Torx bolts in. New water pump is in, and actually before I put the front coolant pipe on, I'm gonna go ahead and take the rear coolant pipe off, just so I don't, it's kind of flimsy if I don't want to put any weight on it and end up breaking anything. So if you look back there, you can see my 1/4" ratchet. Now I've got a short extension on it, and then my T30 Torx bit, which is a 1/4". I don't know if you can see this very well, but basically what I'm doing here, so I'm reaching back, and then I'm stabilizing the ratchet with my arm here. Man, this is kind of hard to show you. I apologize. I like to start with the hard one first, so that way it's downhill from there. So this is the hardest of the 4 back here. But you can see the ratchet right here. And so I'm using my other hand over the top to turn that. And these come off pretty easily. So I just got the first one out, and now on to the next one. It's a little bit easier access, but I'm gonna do the same thing, same tool. Just kind of figure out how to swing the ratchet back there, and you'll get it. I just got the rear coolant pipe out, and I'll just say, really, it's more difficult, at least I've had to tougher time disconnecting this coolant line up here than the Torx bolts that hold this thing on. So maybe it's easier if you want to deal with this first and then get to the Torx bolts. I find you have a little bit better access once these are loose. You can wiggle this around. This quick connect was not coming off, so it's just kind of seized on there. I think I can get it off now that I have better leverage with it out, but I ended up disconnecting the hose clamp. I did take off this plastic cover here. This thing is just like a clamshell. Oops. So if you look on the back, there are some clips. There's one there, one there, one there. And then once you disconnect those, this whole thing, it opens up like that. And then there are a couple, if you look, like right here and right here, there are zip ties that go in there that actually zip tied the harness in. I just clip those with some dikes and then pull the harness out. So it's just way easier when this thing's out of the way to snake everything out. So with it out, I'm gonna go ahead and take the quick connect here, put it onto the new part, and then get the new part installed. So I'm ready now to install the front coolant pipe. And this is just 2 T30 Torx bolts. And it just slips right down in there, and not much to it. So the only thing to note is just make sure that these surfaces here are clean. That's where the O-ring slips in. The seal is all done by that O-ring. So just get it cleaned up really nicely and put the 2 bolts back in and you're good to go. So I just got the front coolant pipe back on. It's easiest if you get this on while you put that in. I left this one loose down here, this hose clamp here, so I can twist that, kind of get it in place. It goes in pretty easily. Next up, I'm gonna put the intake manifold back on. It is torqued to 18 foot-pounds, all the bolts. And there's a specific pattern, but essentially if you just kind of start in the middle and then alternate sides, just kind of in an X pattern, you can't really go too wrong with it. So 18 foot-pounds intake manifold will go back on. Make sure your surfaces are clean. Make sure the gaskets are in good shape that are in the intake manifold. Just got the intake manifold back on. No real tricks to it. And now I'm just getting everything back together, getting the connectors back on. Do not forget the connector underneath the intake manifold. I have now got the radiator hose back on. Put that clamp back on. Put this clamp back on. Getting the coolant hoses all reattached. When you buy this coolant pipe here, make sure that your plug, which is right here, this is like a bleeder plug, make sure that's in good condition on your old one and that you can remove it without breaking it. Otherwise, you might want to just buy a new one when you buy a new pipe. So they're like 10 bucks, something like that. I'm gonna get this all back together and then we'll fill it up with coolant. Well, I just got finished up. Right now, I'm just topping the coolant back up. I don't do anything really crazy for this. I just top it up. If you don't run the engine, you add coolant, you'll see if you just let it sit open for a while that it'll actually take some coolant. It'll drop a little bit over time. Beyond that, just start the engine, let it warm up a little bit, turn it off, top it up again. I wouldn't go driving 200 miles right now. Just get a couple cycles in and it'll eventually take all the coolant in and get all the air bubbles out. So no real tricks to it. Beyond that, if you have any questions, let me know. It's not a horrible job. You might bust your knuckles up a little bit, but the parts aren't too expensive and it's good peace of mind just to know that they're good for the future, that they can get really brittle. They're just plastic. So replace them if you get a chance, and especially if you see that you're losing coolant like I was. If you are losing coolant, take a look under the intake manifold, and if you see orange, then you know that one of those coolant pipes has cracked or is leaking at the O-rings, and you know you need to replace it. So best to catch it early. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them in the comment section, and as always, guys, thanks for watching.